Again, my name is Nicole Buckley Biggs. I'm really thrilled to be moderating our expert panel today. This is the first session of a two-part series, actually, that's focused on ecological monitoring on grazing lands and profit opportunities. So we're thrilled you could be here for part one. Hope you can join us for part two as well. It builds on this discussion. I have to say we're very lucky to have these particular panelists with us today in the room. I can share a bit of why in a moment when I introduce each of them. But in this first session, we'll explore the challenges and the opportunities around measuring ecological outcomes on cattle operations, looking at topics like greenhouse gas monitoring, soil carbon, biodiversity, as well as marketing of sustainable products based on monitoring those outcomes. The second part of the webinar series that will take place in late October, and the specific date and times to be announced, but we will make sure to share that with all of you. The second part will dive a bit deeper into the monetization opportunities around natural capital through improvements of profit and access to new programs that really reward producers for stewardship, from carbon offsets to regenerative certifications and other types of programs. So I hope you're excited for this discussion. Our three panelists today are part of a vanguard of groups that are researching the impacts that different grazing management practices have on the environment, including impacts on soil health, on biodiversity, and also on profit. Each of our panelists has agreed to make a short presentation of their current work, their latest research and efforts. And after the three presentations, we'll open up for discussion, and the panelists have agreed to field any questions you might have for them, and I'll help to moderate that as well. So as Matt said, if you have any questions, please, along the way, throw them into the Q&A or in the chat. We won't stop between the panelist presentations for Q&A, but rather have kind of a full group discussion at the end so we can tie together all the different ideas. So, to start us off, I'm delighted to introduce Russ Conser, our first panelist. Russ is the co-founder and CEO of Blue Nest Beef. You may know him already. If not, I'm pleased to introduce you. Russ is by training a mechanical engineer, and he spent 30 years at Shell. In his later years with the company, he developed investment strategies for novel and alternative energy technologies. And now, as CEO of Blue Nest Beef, Russ is building an e-commerce startup bringing 100% grass-fed beef from land certified by Audubon as bird-friendly, direct to American consumers. So Russ is also the president of the Grass-Fed Exchange, which is a nonprofit regenerative agriculture educational foundation focused on farmer-to-farmer knowledge exchange. So Russ, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and please take it away. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Let's see if my Zoom skills are suitable here. Can you see my slides? All looking good? Very good. Yeah, hi, everybody. My path in here is a little bit unusual. Nick asked me to talk about how I got into this space briefly to kind of set the stage, and as Nick said, I came out of the oil and gas industry, and not only from the perspective of innovation and technology, which would become relevant here, but the real hook for me and the translation into this regenerative agriculture and grazing lands came on the day when someone presented me with data that you see there on the right for a farm. It happened to be in Australia, of carbon concentration in soil, and I immediately recognized it as very similar to what I was familiar with from my deep technical experience in my early years in the oil industry is source rocks. Source rocks are the organic rich sediments that once buried deep into the earth turn into oil and gas. And what I saw here was these farmers practicing things that were putting the carbon right back where it was before people like me found it and extracted it and put it in your gas tank. So all of a sudden it was very, very credible to me. And this led to a whole bunch of insights that I just never had before, and recognizing how planet Earth works as a whole, as a system where life captures sunshine, and carbon is the mechanism by which it's captured, but it's stored in the biosphere. And surprisingly, because it's hidden from us, I like to call soil the dirty iceberg, because soil has about 4 times as much carbon in the top 2 meters of soil than all the biomass you see above the ground. So the bigger part is the part that's under the surface. One of the key things that I learned early on in here, but only one of the ways to put more carbon into that soil was to change how we graze livestock. And of course, it's way more complicated than this slide, but the big idea is to try to mimic the ecological patterns of roaming bison, where instead of having cattle standing still or spending a lot of time in one place, to have dense herds that move frequently and after long periods of rest, come back to the same place. We now understand scientifically, basically what's going on when that happens, that the grazing animal, when it has this pulse grazing relationship to plants, is effectively pumping food to microbes in the soil below through the grass roots. And then the microbes bring nutrients from the soil sediments back to the plant, which grows more and better grass. All of this happens by accumulating more and more carbon in the soil. So this is kind of what's going on in this living ecosystem. And all of the things we see above the ground, like biodiversity, birds and butterflies, like in Nicole's background here, are expressions of a healthy ecosystem that starts in that hidden dirty iceberg in the soil. So probably a lot of the farmers and ranchers on this webinar are familiar with and have measured on their own land that when they implement these kind of practices that are regenerative, you can tangibly see improvements in soil organic matter over time. The rate at which it might happen may be different, where you start from may be different, but the opportunity to accumulate more and more carbon in soil is broadly applicable. And to my eyes, that coming out of the oil and gas industry, where we would think in millions of years of ecological evolution, this is remarkably fast how responsive ecosystems are. So along that journey, we kind of decided, well, I guess to make the analogy here with my own experience in energy, it struck me that regenerative agriculture was very much where renewable energy was about 25 years ago or so. We had small isolated pockets, and the opportunity was, how do we scale this up and make it bigger? So we kind of tongue-in-cheek coined this company name of Standard Soil to put carbon back into the ground instead of take it out. And our first step after a lot of experimentation was to create this Blue Nest beef brand to bring beef coming from these lands to market. That's when we started working with Nicole and her colleagues at the National Audubon Society, because they were simultaneously realizing that these same practices that store carbon restore grassland bird habitat. And we think that's a much, much easier story to tell to people and engage people that already appreciate birds, and to work with something that is visible above the ground, even though it's based on a lot of things that are happening under the ground. So I'll leave Nicole to tell you a lot about this. This is one project I've been involved with in southern Mississippi, and it's yet to be published, but soon to be published peer-reviewed research. It's just in the final stages now, where we've gone in and done bird population and species counts, and see that with these grazing management practices, we can see a very significant increase in grassland obligate bird species. And I think Nicole's going to show more data on that kind of stuff. So as a business, what we sell is beef and steak and meat sticks that go into roasts that you can get delivered direct to your door. But behind the scenes, what we're trying to do is drive that mission of restoring grasslands and biodiversity and storing carbon and all that wonderful stuff. So that's me in a nutshell. And I'll turn it back over to Nick to keep it going.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Russ. You raised a lot of topics that I'm sure our audience is going to have questions about and would want to dig into. But before we do, we have two more panelists to hear from. So next, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Nicole Michael, who serves as the Director of Quantitative Science with the National Audubon Society's science team. Nicole has been with Audubon since 2015, and she leads a team of scientists to analyze bird population trends. She studied birds for 25 years, including during her PhD in ecology from Tulane University and 2 postdoc fellowships at the University of Saskatchewan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nicole Michael.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nick, and thank you, Russ, for a fantastic presentation there. That did a great job of segueing right into mine. So I am here to speak with you a bit more about our conservation ranching program. Russ gave us a great introduction to conservation ranching. We partner with ranchers across North America in developing bird-friendly habitat management practices, and with the objective of both supporting ranchers and reversing grassland bird population declines. So this does come from this conservation crisis. You've just seen this slide, but there has been a decline of North American birds with a loss of nearly 3 billion birds since 1970. And of these, the greatest losses have been amongst grassland birds. We've seen 720 million grassland birds lost since 1970, including 3 or 4 eastern meadowlarks. And so this really highlights the importance of taking new approaches to conserve grasslands and the birds that use them. So this is our purpose. The purpose of Audubon conservation ranching is to stabilize these declining grassland bird populations through partnerships with private land stewards. So this is, as Russ is one example. It is a market-based approach in which we connect bird-friendly livestock management practices to consumer demand for healthy food and environmental sustainability. And it's also a market-driven approach through which we create the mechanism whereby that demand can then incentivize more ranches to become certified. And this leads to more acres of bird habitat. So this is all falls under the Audubon certified seal. This is a seal that actually goes on the meat that is sold. The seal recognizes the lands that are managed to promote birds as well as other biodiversity. The program works with ranchers. We partner with these private landowners to work together to develop habitat management plans and achieve ranch certification. And then beef sourced from these certified ranches, and they carry the Audubon certified green seal shown here. And this adoption of the certification seal turns consumers actually into conservationists through the power of their purchase. So we currently have 100 ranches certified across 15 states. That is a total of 3 million acres of ranch land that is certified. And our program is actually in a phase of rapidly growing. We've just taken on many new large operators. So we have 3 main pillars to our work. The first is habitat management. This is that habitat management plan that I mentioned that we develop in conjunction with the ranch owners. The second is animal health and welfare, in that partnering ranchers demonstrate a commitment to caring for their livestock and ensuring their health and welfare. And then the third is environmental sustainability. So ranchers that participate in our program commit to reduce pesticides, minimize fertilizers, protect stream banks, and through all of this, they're improving environmental conditions for birds, for pollinators, and for people. So the actual data that we collect, in order to show the impact that our ranching management practices are having, every 2 years at every ranch, we conduct bird monitoring. This has currently been done primarily, with actual boots on the ground, people conducting what are called point count or transect surveys. Although Isabella is going to be speaking to you a little bit more, I believe, about acoustic recording units where you can actually get bird recordings and identify species from them. And we are looking into placing those at some of our ranches. We also do soil monitoring, including baseline soil carbon, water infiltration, and the St. Haney soil health test. Okay, so we have this data, but then how do we actually evaluate the impacts of habitat management on grassland birds? Because Audubon prides ourselves as an accountable conservation organization. We don't want to just say we're making a difference. We want to actually show that we're making a difference. And so to this end, my team with a number of partners developed what's we refer to as the Bird Friendliness Index. This is an accountability metric that we use to quantify the impact of our conservation ranching program on vulnerable grassland and aridland birds. And it's, the devil's in the details, right? There's complications, but at base, it's a simple formula. It's number of birds, how many are there? It's the diversity of the birds, and then it shows resilience of the bird community and the larger community. And this is due to this inclusion of a functional diversity metric. So we look at just not, what the species is called, but what do they eat? Where do they eat it? And we look at their body size as well, because if you have a community with a diversity of diets and foraging strategies and body sizes, the birds are more resilient, there's less competition amongst them, and the larger community is more resilient, there's less competition for insects, for seeds. So why do we look at this, whole bird community response? Why don't we just, pick a species, and look at changes in their numbers? Well, grassland birds have very different needs. Some, can do very well in these, bare ground situations. Others need really dense shrub vegetation, and others fall somewhere in between. So there's no one species that represents the needs of the entire community. Also, grassland birds are declining across North America, and for reasons that go beyond, habitat management on the breeding grounds. And so an index based on numbers of birds alone would not pick up the impacts necessarily that we're having on grassland bird community health and resilience. The index also allows us to isolate the management impacts from these larger regional trends. So this year we've gone through this extreme drought, and bird populations respond quite strongly to things like changes in precipitation. Here you can see precipitation in Wyoming over the last about 100 years. And, you can see clay-colored sparrow, one of the grassland bird populations. So, similar great variation amongst years and abundance. So, if you're in an area where there's a drought, birds are going to be struggling across the board. But ranches that are implementing bird-friendly management practices will be doing a bit better than other nearby ranches. And so this index is relative. It compares ranches to other properties that have been surveyed in the region. So quickly, just to touch on some of the data we use. Again, there's bird count data. Currently, we gather it from boots on the ground, people out there counting birds through programs like Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Integrated Monitoring of Bird Conservation Regions. We also partner with Point Blue Conservation Science in California. And we use other forms of data such as transects, eBirds, and we're looking into acoustic recording units. We then in the index look at how vulnerable the birds are. So there are these scores that come from expert opinion that we incorporate. So if you're supporting a vulnerable species, you're really doing something right. And then the functional diversity, again, we look at what the birds eat, where, and how large they are. It provides information about their ecological roles and thus their balance across the community. So we look at 107 bird species that use grasslands or airlands. And in California, because ranches are in chaparral and oak woodland habitat, we look at some additional species that use those habitats. Okay, so we have this index. What do the numbers look like and what does it mean? Well, as I mentioned, the index is relative. You're comparing your property to other surveyed areas within the region. And so the index is scaled to range between 0 to 1. And the way this works is that then if you're, 0.5 is your average. So if your score is better than 0.5, it indicates that, the property is more bird friendly, than other surveyed areas within the region. So a 0.33 then is better than a third of nearby lands. A 0.67 is better than 2/3. So what are we finding? Well, I just, finished up the results for 2016 to 2021, looked at 95 ranches across the United States. And we found that across all 95 ranches, our mean BFI was 0.58. So it's above 0.5. It's better than other conventionally managed lands. And it is also increased by 1% a year, which is what we want to see, that these areas are becoming more bird friendly. And when we divide this up by region, looking at California versus the interior West, and then the Midwest here, we see in California, ranches are in great condition with a mean BFI 0.76. In the interior West, a mean BFI 0.53. And in the Midwest, kind of the Goldilocks, mean BFI 0.64. And it's increasing the most rapidly, 1.6% a year. Also, just want to share that BFI has also been adopted by other organizations, especially up in Canada, where Birds Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada and other agencies are using it as an impact metric. And I want to give a shout out to our partners and collaborators that have been essential in this effort. Partners such as Russ and Blue Nest Beef, and also my contact information is here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was very enlightening, especially around the bird friendliness index, which maybe folks had heard about, but hadn't gotten this kind of a deep dive before. So thank you. I'm going to ask you later, and I'll just tee this up now. I'm curious for your thoughts during our Q&A on why you think there are these regional differences and how the BFI's numbers are improving across those different areas. But before we get to that, we have our third esteemed panelist who I'm very excited to introduce, and that's Dr. Isabella Maciel. Isabella joins us from the Noble Research Institute in Oklahoma. She serves as systems researcher and principal investigator on their $19 million program funded by the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, which many of us have heard about. I was hoping she could give us a bit of a deep dive into the details of that program, so she's kindly agreed to join us today. That program is aimed at understanding how management decisions on pasture and rangeland are interconnected to the overall health of the ecosystem. Isabella works also with research teams and collaborators to design and implement experiments and trials that can move forward our community's knowledge of the benefits of regenerative grazing approaches for livestock operations. Isabella completed a veterinary medicine degree, as well as her master's and PhD in animal science from the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. So we have a bit of a different perspective here. Her past research explored the fundamentals of beef cattle nutrition, food animal production, environmental safety, and mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. So without further ado, Isabella, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. Let me share my screen here. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, so first I would like to thank Nick for inviting me for this webinar and for giving me the opportunity to talk about Noble and the work that we have done and how we are contributing to create healthier and richer soil for our future. And I also would like to thank everybody that is here, and also Russ and Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here in this webinar presenting with you. So as Nick introduced me, I am from Noble Research Institute. Noble is a non-profit research organization, and it's dedicated to delivering solutions to great agriculture challenges. And this week, actually, we are celebrating 7 years of our institute. And I would like to show like this quote from Lloyd Noble from 1943. So he asked this question: are we going to encourage the conservation and upbuilding of our soil so it will support a growing, health and prosperous livestock and agrarian industry? Or are we going to allow our soils to be depleted? So I think we are here today. We all decide to conserve our soil, and this is why we are here doing research. And yeah, I just thought would be also showing this quote from Lloyd Noble from 1943. So I also would like to show one of our goals. Actually, it's our midterm goal. By 2024, Noble would like to guide farmers and ranchers to improve soil health in their grazing operations. And the key metrics include having 600 farmers and ranchers who are implementing the 6 principles of soil health and setting financial goals. And I just put here the 6 principles of soil health. I think it's something that most of you guys already know, but it's good, like, always remember it. So the first one, it's know your contest. I think we all know that there's no one size fits all recipe, right? And this is really, we need to look at your land, at your contest. So the second one, cover the soil. The third, minimize soil disturbance. 4, increase diversity. 5, maintain living plants and roots. And 6, integrate livestock. And I think I will focus more on that because we are working with ranchers, and we want to see how the grazing management can change the soil health and can help, like, climate change. So the other key metrics is having 200,000 acres transitioning from conventional to a more regenerative agriculture. And the third is having create 3 introduced recurring products or service and 1 peer network. So we are working on this, and you guys stay tuned. We are probably having this by next year. And this is how we are planning, like, to help 600 farmers and ranchers for the next years. So, but to do that, right, to be able to guide farmers and ranchers, we are starting this transition in our ranchers, and we are making transitions on 7 research ranches that we have here in southern Oklahoma. It's a total of 14,000 acres. And we are transitioning our ranchers just like we will ask producers to do if they are interested to change in their system. And here are some protocols that we are testing in our ranchers, and we are hoping to show people what is important to measure when you are transition from a conventional to a more regenerative system. So we are doing some soil tests. This include, like, conventional, HNA, PLFA, which is phospholipid fatty acids, and also soil organic carbon. So this is all, like, measuring organic matter, soil carbon, also microbial biomass. We also are interested to see the microbial community in our soils. Also soil organic, aggregate stability. So we know, like, a better aggregate tends to have better water infiltration, better holding capacity. We are also doing the soil bulk density, so which measure compaction, and we want to decrease this compaction over time. We are also measuring soil color, and we know that carbon in organic matter is responsible for the darker color in soils, and we would like this the top layer going, like, deeper, and this is why we are measuring the soil color. Also looking at soil erosion, look for signs of wind or water erosion. Counting earthworms, they are really important to, they influence the water cycle and the nutrient cycle. So we are also measuring water infiltration, doing some vegetation sampling, take some pictures to monitor our sites, and we are also monitoring our wildlife and using some, like, cameras and apps some bed box as well. So we are looking for beds, monitoring pollinators. We are also doing this acoustic monitoring. We can talk more about it if we have time later, but this is all the protocols that we are doing in our range, and we are expecting to see like which one are the important, you know, to measure this transition. So here I put some pictures. So we are using Getting Struck to collect some soil cores when we need like deeper. We are also using soil probes. Here you can see the infiltration. Here counting earthworms, also doing the vegetation ID, the wildlife color. And I also add some pictures here of the animals. First, because they are cute, right? But second and most important, because livestock, it's an important tool when you are transition to a more regenerative system. And they can build soil health, reduce nutrient loss, and reduce farm inputs as well. So we are also have this project that Nicole talked a little bit, and I'm really proud of being the PI of this project, because we are not measuring only the ecological and all this like soil samples, but we are also trying to look at the social economic impact of the grazing management and how this is going to impact the human well-being, and also if their ranges are profitable or not. So the project name is Metrics Management and Monitoring, an investigation of pasture and rangeland soil health and its drivers. So here you can see who is doing the project. We have the US map here. We have like research from 11 non-profit organizations, private research organizations, and public universities in the US and also in the United Kingdom. So if you see here, like we have the leading institution, which is Noble, Michigan State, and Colorado State. And we have 3 research hubs. It's like the sites that we are installing all the metrics that we are gonna measure. And we have like 2 hubs here at Noble. We have another one in Michigan and another one in University of Wyoming. We also have a lot of collaborators in this project, as you can see here in your left. So Oregon State University, NetGLC, University of Wyoming, USDA, Quanterra, Savory, Snaplands, and the Nature Conservancy. And I just would like to thank all of them for the support and for helping us with this project. And this is a 5 years project, and I'm sorry that I don't have any results yet. We are just finalized the first year, but I also would like to thank FAR for funding this project. It's the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. Noble also funded it, and Green Acres, Butcher Box, and the Jones Family Foundation. So the focus of this project, as Nick was saying, is to see how management decisions on pasture and rangeland are interconnected to the overall health of the ecosystem. And I think the coolest part of this project, because we are not looking only at soil, forage, and animals, but also at people. And we know that the grazelands are complex social ecological system. And this is why we are seeking to understand not only how grazing management affect the overall health of the ecosystem, but also how people are interconnected to the environment and how their decisions can affect their well-being and their economic results. So we are about to finalize the first year. So we have established already our 3 monitoring sites and 3 locations, as I said, like Wyoming, Michigan, and Oklahoma. And we are collecting all this data to be the baseline of our project. And then we are gonna have this different grazing management, and we are gonna evaluate all the sites for 5 years and see like how it will change like the atmospheric gases like CO2, the soil carbon. We are also like have a lot of metrics for water cycle. We are looking at biomass, remote sensing, all these modules. And the other, like the second part that we are about to start is to engage 60 ranchers, and we are going to pick 20 ranchers in each location. And they are going to be able to quantify and understand how their management affects soil health, and what are the strategies that are best implemented to improve the overall soil health of grazing lands, and also their profitability. So this is the next step. It's like starting selecting producers. So if you are in Oklahoma, Michigan, or Wyoming, just stay like tuned, because we are gonna start like having surveys and picking these 60 ranchers to be part of this project. And I just would like to finalize saying that I hope we can like build better soils and better landscapes, and hopefully we are gonna have happier and healthier families. So this is our final goal. So this is why we include all these ranchers in our project, and we are really happy and excited to see the outcomes of this project. So thank you so much. Here's my email. If anyone have any questions, I'm here to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. That was fantastic. And I think what's really neat about this conversation across all of the presentations today is that people don't often get a sneak peek into research as it's happening, or companies in their very early stages. You know, for academic research, you see maybe the published tied journal article years after, and just having an opportunity to interact with you all and to be able to ask questions and see what's so surprising, or what you're hoping, what you might be expecting from these studies is really exciting. So the other interesting thing I think here is that all of this research is exploring the kind of what ifs, like what if a rancher adopted this practice, how would it impact soil health, biodiversity, economics, right? And it's these kind of like scenarios that haven't really been fully tested and are so relevant to the public interest right now in regenerative agriculture, and federal level interest to understand, well, what are we aiming at and what might be possible in different geographies. So I'm very excited now to open up the discussion to take some audience questions. Everyone, please feel free to throw your questions into the chat, and I'll field them to the panelists. And while people are thinking about what questions they might have, I have a couple in mind. One is, Nicole, I want to circle back to you on the different regional outcomes that you're seeing, and what you think might be able to explain those regional variations.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that was something that really surprised me when I went through and ran these analyses. The program so far, we have not been going out necessarily and, targeting ranchers' properties for enrollment. So there's been people approaching us with an interest, and so the people who approach us often are, people who already are, using sustainable ranching practices. And so in a place like California, where we had the highest BFI scores, we had just a few ranches. There's just 6 there that were included in this analysis, and they do happen to be ones that have been using really sustainable techniques for a long time, even before joining the program. Whereas other ones that, we have a larger number of ranches, and their kind of, scores are all over the board. And so over time, we're seeing them increase, but yeah, it's just kind of happenstance depending on who joins the program.
Great. Okay. Another question I have, and maybe I would love both Russ and Isabella to answer this from your different perspectives. I'm curious, and I know a lot of people are kind of asking this question right now, is how do we go from research and monitoring in an academic setting or a well-funded research setting? How do we scale that across rangeland landscapes to kind of normal ranchers? How do we, are the systems that you're developing intended to be used for monitoring at scale? Or are we trying to develop our understanding of what might be possible today? What are your views on that? And Russ, what is the role of kind of the marketplace and the private sector in helping to scale some of these things? But maybe starting with Isabella.
So it's a great question, Nick. We are trying to see like doing all these protocols, which one are the most important to do. And it's not only about like, we are looking at how much it's gonna cost, like the time, if a producer would do that or not. And at the end, like, is this data it's gonna be useful or not? So we are really working on that right now. So we have this list of a lot of protocols that we are doing in our sites, but we would like to, like in a couple, I don't know, years or, you know, months, I don't know, we can like analyze this data and see like, no, these are the ones that is really important to do. And we would like to recommend based on like time, you know, money, and if the data is useful or not, because doesn't make sense just go out and collect a lot of things, and if you don't know if it's useful or not, then, you know, just waste your time or your money.
Right. Russ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll try to avoid going down deep into the rabbit hole, but on the journey to get to where you want to go, you got to start where you are. So your question was really good. And where we are is we don't even understand some of the dynamics at the ranch scale. So kind of this in-depth, expensive research is very natural for where we're at. But a lot of it is being done, like one of the technologies that's being deployed as a part of Isabella's projects for counting carbon allows us to do it in real time and much, much cheaper than the scientific methods have done up until now. It was the Quanterra company that she mentioned in that system. And so we do hope that with what we learn there, we can measure more and measure more accurately and measure more at scale in time. That said, I'm going to put a plug in for birds to Nicole here, because the surprising thing to me is I'm a carbon geek, right? And so like measuring it in soil, measuring flux in the atmosphere, all that stuff is really, really interesting. But I learned fairly early on in my journey that wildlife and biodiversity can tell you a whole lot very cheaply. It was interesting that both Isabella and Nicole mentioned acoustic monitoring. You know, birds evolved to talk to each other through song. They send signals. And it can be as simple as listening with that system. Now there's complex technology behind those things for interpreting, you know, the calls and counting them and things like that. And I think those technologies will make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to track, you know, healthy soils. I mean, it was first time I took my wife on one of the regenerative properties in Missouri, by the way, which really has been ground zero for a lot of really interesting pioneers in this space. And it's just like the first thing she noticed, like, look, this place is full of life. I see bees and butterflies and birds, and I'm not used to see. That's not what the farm I grew up on looked like. So over time, we're going to learn enough, and like Isabella said, figure out which ones we really you know, may need to count scientifically, but which ones we can really use to understand the health of an ecosystem on an ongoing basis. And for now, as geeky as I am on counting carbon, I say follow the birds. If you, in fact, in this research project that I've been involved with separately in the southeastern U.S., from which that data I showed, that the bird module was added late in our planning, and it's the most night and day difference between regenerative and non-regenerative properties. So, and I think that's something you can be 5 years old or 50. And you don't even have to over quantify it. You can get a quick sense of the health of an ecosystem by watching birds and other wildlife. So in time, we'll figure out how to make this deeper in scale and make it visible for people. But that's my view anyway.
That's such an interesting concept, Russ, because we have on the one hand, the idea of monitoring soil carbon using remote sensing from satellite imagery.
Yeah.
And now we're saying, well, maybe there's another way we could go about it with bioacoustic sensors of bird population, like closer to the ground. What are the different opportunities, and really understanding what indicators will represent that outcome.
Yeah, I even think of birds as mobile biosensors, really. I mean, if I were going to design the perfect scientific sensor, I'd make it live off the environment it has to work with. I'd make it mobile so it can go to where it wants, and I make it sensitive to the variables in the environment. That's a bird. So, you know, I came into the Audubon relationship here very ignorant, frankly. And everything I continue to learn is, wow, that's amazing. Like there's something really here, and I don't give up, and I'm still very active on the scientific quantitative stuff. But I think we have to learn how to integrate all that information and figure out what's the easy and quick way to measure things too.
Right. Nicole, we have a question for you in the chat, and I think this is also both for Isabella and Nicole. So the question was, is it possible, or sorry, the first one is from somebody who is wondering for the Noble Institute if additional areas will be added to the study, including Eastern Oregon, where Eric's from, who's asking the question. So I want to pose to both Isabella and Nicole, what regions are you including, and how can a regular producer who might not have been involved in the past interact with your organizations or join your programs? Maybe starting with Isabella.
So for now, we are just doing Oklahoma, Michigan, and Wyoming, unfortunately. But Noble is gonna help producers in, you know, the next couple months, and we are trying to have this product out there. But we are probably be more concentrate in Texas and Oklahoma. But I mean, give us a call and send us a mail. We are happy, you know, to help. But for this project, we are concentrating these 3 areas that I mentioned.
Great. And Nicole, from the Audubon side?
Yeah, so our conservation ranching program, I mean, we are growing and expanding dramatically. We do already have a few enrolled ranches in Southern Oregon, Southeastern Oregon, and as far west as Western Montana. So not too far away from Eastern Oregon. I'm actually based in Portland myself. And, you know, we welcome new people interested in the program. Matt, I believe, is going to be, if he hasn't already, shared links to our program. And in there's information about how to reach out and find out about joining.
Great. We have a very interesting question here from Steve Schramm. Is there evidence that improved biodiversity improves the health or growth of cattle? And I will open this to anyone who wants to answer this question.
Silent.
Or if we don't have evidence yet, what
I'm not aware of any. It's an interesting question. I think we know that the cattle have an impact on birds by helping create the habitat. You know, the slide that Nicole showed, the cattle are so important to creating that tapestry, that mosaic of different habitats that create things for birds, but nor the birds doing some things in there that help the cattle. What a great question. Maybe one for years from now, perhaps, but a really good one. I mean, we know birds transport nutrients across landscapes. We know birds transport seeds. And there's plausible relationships, but I'm not aware of anything, unless Nicole, you are.
No, and you know, I've always thought of it as more of a collinear relationship. Sorry to use a jargony word. It's more that these practices are good for both birds and diversity, and for cattle, rather than being the increases in biodiversity themselves directly benefiting the cattle. I think it's that the conditions on the ground are changing, and that in itself has multiple benefits.
Especially for the environment, right? In general, yeah.
Nicole, we have another question for you. Does Audubon have any plans to expand the conservation ranching program to cropland for farmers that also raise cattle?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. And I would direct you to Chris Wilson, our director of the program, for that. I'm not sure.
Okay, stay tuned. I guess is maybe the
Stay
answer to
tuned.
that question. Let me see, Matt, are there any questions that I've missed that are in the chat so far?
I see there's two in the Q&A section, one from Guillermo to Nicole. Is it possible to see trends increase or decrease in the BFI across regions from 2016 to 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was one of those last figures I showed, showing increases in the BFI at the regional level. So we had an increase of 1% per year overall, 1.6% per year in the Midwest. Also behind the scenes, I mean, I have that information for each individual ranch. So we are able to do that.
I have a question, and maybe I'll pose this to Russ. A lot of producers I've spoken with are wary about environmentalists, the government, outside organizations coming to their property and monitoring things that they might, find something that could restrict the producer's future ability to have a viable operation. Lots of concerns around monitoring. What would you say to producers who might have those concerns regarding, what role monitoring might play on their land and whether those risks are something that you're thinking about on your side?
Great question. First of all, it's the right to be skeptical. So it's okay. It's okay, and it's healthy to start there. What I've seen, frankly, over the last 10 years is a shift. The kind of research projects that are really healthier, where honest, humble researchers are setting foot on farms and trying to understand what the ranchers are doing rather than trying to criticize what they're doing or anything else like that. And I've just seen some magical relationships between the researchers gathering data that helps the farmers and ranchers, and gives them not largely affirmative feedback and deeper understanding for what's going on. So and it's almost no matter what door you come in through, whether it's appreciating insects or birds or carbon or water infiltration. I'd say as long as the ranchers remain in control of what's going on and have a healthy relationship with scientists they can trust, I've just seen nothing but magical relationships happen. Now, if some arrogant team shows up at your door thinking they have all the answers and they're going to tell you how to manage your ranch, that's the wrong kind of research to get involved with, in my view. I don't think anyone here needs me to tell them that. But I think this observational research that we're seeing more and more of is generating, frankly, the evidence that's going to help us. See, I believe 2/3 of agricultural land is grazing land. So it's the largest fraction of agricultural land. And I think ranchers are providing some of the most valuable ecosystem services to our country, any country. But so much of it's hidden and it's not understood. And once it's made visible, then I think there's opportunities to get more appreciation here. Stay tuned. My good friend and collaborator here, Peter Beck, is coming out with a new mini series based on the research we've done in the Southeast. It's also a wonderful story of real farms and ranchers that are, we're measuring data, but they're trying to understand things, and they learn and they grow and they improve in their system. So I think that kind of stuff is really, really helpful. And I think it really can change minds of people, that they appreciate that. I mean, the cattle to me are just like so important, and I had no clue before. Livestock and grazing lands are essential in this system, and if we don't help people see the benefits of these ecosystems, that's why they're going to keep growing their things. Beef is evil, and cattle are evil, and it's just it's more complicated than that.
That's a great answer, Russ. Yeah. I want to build on that, and actually, there's a relevant question for Nicole on this. Who collects the BFI data? Could you talk a little bit about that?
A lot of different people and organizations. So I've seen there's a few folks from Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. We use their integrated monitoring of bird conservation regions protocol. And matter of fact, they and their partners collect data on many of the ranches for us. In California, we're partnering with Point Blue Conservation Science. In Missouri, we're partnering with Missouri River Bird Observatory. And then on some ranches, the ranchers themselves or volunteers or local staff are collecting data.
Fantastic. Okay. We have a comment, and Isabella, it's not a question, but I think maybe you'll have some thoughts on it. Jim Johnson commented, I have many anecdotes that cattle grazing in more diverse ecosystems have less morbidity and mortality than cattle grazing in less diverse ecosystems. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think I agree with him, but it's good, like maybe we can start the research, right, and measuring it. But yeah, I definitely agree. It's not only like the diversity, like birds, but also the plant diversity, or also if you have not only cattle, but if you have a diversity of species, animals species as well. So goat, sheep. So I really agree with him, and I think it's great when you have diversity in all, that like not only plants or environment, but animals and everything.
Yeah, I really like Nicole's slide. I thought it was great. I got a deeper appreciation of functional diversity. Diversity is not simply an aesthetic, it's a function in an ecosystem, and it tells you something about how all the layers of an ecosystem are working. And you can do it within birds, but you can do it at all layers in that system. I think diversity is powerful. It's a primary driver of nature.
Yeah.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. So if anyone has any questions in the back of their minds, please throw them into the chat so that we can get to them before we wrap up. In the meantime, I have one more question. I'm going to pose it to Isabella, I think, but Russ and Nicole, feel free to chime in as well. I'm curious, what do you think are the environmental outcomes where we can make the most progress through grazing management? Is it bird habitat? Is it soil carbon? Is it soil health? Is it water infiltration? From what you're seeing so far, or maybe we don't know, so projecting out, what do you expect will be the most impacted by a change in management practices?
I think the organic carbon for sure would be one that we are going to see. And water, like the amount of water that our soil is holding is something I think that it's really powerful. And I think we can see this change when you start, having this like work, thinking about soil health. So I think you are going to see carbon, increase of carbon, and also like the holding capacity, the water holding capacity in your soil. I don't know if Russ want to add something, but
yeah, no, I think water, carbon, and biodiversity I would add in there. I honestly think that the biggest one you can impact the fastest is biodiversity, birds being emblematic of that. It's a big need. I hope people appreciate. I like that slide that both Nicole and we didn't collaborate on that, but use the same picture, right? We've lost 50% of grassland birds in 50 years. And it's no wonder if you plow up all their habitat and spray it with poisons that they're not there. And yet I've seen on farms just a remarkable recovery of bird species when management practices are changed. So I think that's low-hanging fruit and something that's visible early. I think the water thing is probably, as much as I care about carbon, I think the water is going to be the one that's going to pay big dividends for farmers' soil health. We talk about effective rainfall, right? When the water falls from the sky, do you hold on to it or does it run off? And I think the first order impact for farmers will be water. Now that water holding capacity increases because of the carbon underneath it. That's kind of a root cause in that system. But I think it's that water holding capacity that's going to make the biggest difference in the farming operations themselves, in making them viable, resilient to drought, and more healthy forages and things like that.
Nicole, any final thoughts on this question before we wrap up?
I think they've covered it really well. Certainly, we're seeing changes in some of the soil carbon metrics, and we're demonstrably seeing changes in birds as well.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. I know we could talk about this for hours, but I hope that for everyone who tuned in today, that this session brought up some new learning, some takeaways for your own operation or your own organization as you're thinking about the future and changes in management practices, what kind of outcomes we can see. Luckily, this was part one of a two-part webinar, and so stay tuned for that second one, part two, that will be more focused on profit opportunities for producers who plug into these kinds of programs. But I just want to thank our panelists one more time for joining us today. It was our pleasure to have you here, and I feel very lucky on behalf of AgriWebb that we could have these amazing voices in the room to share the early stages, the vanguard of the kind of research that's happening. So thank you so much again. Just a note that this webinar is being recorded, and so that'll be posted online. If you I would like to share it with anyone else or review it, that'll be posted on our website. And please feel free to reach out anytime to our team or to me if you have suggestions for future topics for webinars that you think would be of interest, that you're curious about. That's what we're here for, is to really dig into the nuances of these questions that folks are talking about and hopefully open up new areas of discussion and draw out new answers. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.